welcome to another episode of Everyday Eternal. With me tonight, as usual, are my co-hosts Bob Wang.
Hello, hello.
And Oops All Spells Master, I want to say, Eric Lenton. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hi, what's up?
So, we were just watching Eric's stream right before the recording, and Eric, did you actually break the metagame? Did you break Legacy with the deck that you just played, Oops All Spells?
I've been trying. Every time I try, I lose a lot of tickets.
But there's that one guy, Jax, who keeps playing and he's like, this deck is
He's
good.
He's the reason. He tells me, try this. I try it and I lose, and then I'm like, I know what I'll do. I'll change this and this and this, and then it'll be good. And no, it's still not good.
Right before we started recording, we were actually discussing a couple of lines that came up from Eric, and it's so weird how you're playing this all-in combo deck, yet you had the turn 1 kill, and we were discussing whether you should mulligan that to play around something your opponent might have on a mulligan to 5. I think, that the deck requires a certain mindset, and the mindset is make them have it, and if they do, I will, 1 and 7 the GP or something.
Yeah, the tools you have to fight back against hate are minimal because you don't have mana, and the main purpose of the deck is to get up to 4 mana. So it's hard to have extra mana, and you don't have lands, so you don't have that many tools to work with in all of what's out there.
It's basically a strictly worse version of Black Red Reanimator, you want to say?
I think so, for sure.
But every deck in Legacy is, right, according to you? I would guess.
As far as combo decks, I think, yeah. I don't call Depths really a combo deck, even though it kind of is, but...
Yeah, what if you put Force of Vigor in Black Red Reanimator? Just play a bunch of green creatures and then beat all the leyline decks.
Somebody was talking about that on the Reanimator Facebook page, and they were
what creatures
discussing all the creatures.
Terrastodon, you can't play Progenitus.
You're making your deck really bad to play Force of Vigor.
Verdant Force, bring back Verdant Force. Yes. I think there's actually a couple of decks in Legacy that would be really bad against that.
Yeah, that'd be sweet.
Grixis Delver, what are they going to do against Verdant Force?
I don't think Grixis Delver is much of a deck anymore. Maybe a couple people still play it, but...
if you say that, then it must be true, right? I meet so many people in Europe when I go to tournaments and we talk about the podcast. They always ask me about what you are playing. And ever since you basically broke Legacy with Blue-Red Delver, people heavily associate you with Delver decks, even though I think you actually recently told me that you don't even like playing Delver. Is that true, Bob?
Well, I like playing the deck. I just don't think it's that good right now, despite the fact that everybody seems to be playing it. I guess maybe it's still the second or third or fourth best deck. And obviously there are different builds of it, but my car's license plate actually says Delver, so...
Oh, does it really? Oh, you gotta take a picture so we can put that on the website.
I can definitely send it to you.
Which kind of car are you driving?
Honda Accord. So if it flips, I get to fly.
Why is it not a Honda Civic?
Oh, because that's Delver. Honda Civic is Delver.
Exactly.
Honda Accord's a higher end Delver then. It's a Delver that flips more.
Oh, okay. I don't know which cars are more likely to flip. I think there's actually a downside, isn't it? Anyway, since you haven't really been playing a lot of Delver in quite a while, you switched to, I don't even want to say the dark side. I think it actually feels like one of the good as a non-evil decks in the format right now, in Golgari Depth, as SCG calls it, or I guess we would call it slow depth. And you did really, really well with it on the weekend. Tell us about it, Bob.
Yeah, I did. I ended up, I didn't day 2 the Open, but I did fairly well in the Open. I think I went 6-2-1. And then at the at the Classic, which is kind of the runner-ups tournament, I won the whole event, which was pretty sweet. I ended up going, I think, 8-1-1 on the day. So then overall, my record, I think, was 14-3. But all 3 of my losses, I think I misplayed. So I think the deck is excellent. I'm not sure if the deck will remain excellent for the next month for the GP, because this has happened before where Depths was just one of the best decks, and then the metagame online at least seemed to adapt for it. So I'm excited to keep playing it, but I'm not entirely locked on it yet.
So before we move on and actually look into the deck, to us European or Asian listeners, how prestigious is an SCG Classic? How many people do play in that? Because I sometimes see it come up, and I have no idea. Is it a 50-person tournament, a 200-person tournament?
So this event was 120 people, so it was 7 rounds, but it was, just short of 8 rounds. So I would say, compared to a lot of European tournaments, this is probably one of the larger ones. I think MKM is bigger, but there's not too many other tournament series that are bigger than that. So yeah, I think it's a good size.
And it's basically for other people who didn't make the top 8 on the first day, or how does it work?
No, it's for everybody who doesn't day 2 and open, then you get to play in the Classic. But Legacy Classics are only available for Team Opens and Legacy Opens. So they don't happen every weekend. It's it's probably every other Open or so.
Awesome. And like you mentioned, you think this deck is really good right now, but you're not locked into it for Atlanta, because I would have guessed, seeing the success you've been having and how good depth in general has been positioned for the metagame, that this would be like something people would definitely be looking into playing at the GP.
Oh no, it's definitely my first choice, but I guess what I'm saying is I've seen this story before, and I think Legacy has seen this story before where a deck is really dominant and then people start to, play sideboard cards to beat it, and then it becomes less good of a choice. So right before, or like during Grand Prix Shizuoka last year, it was also insanely well positioned, and it did very well at the GP in Japan. But then in the coming months after that, it was still very good, and I did end up going 12-3 with it in Niagara. So I guess it's always been just quite good, but it's not necessarily insanely good. I don't know. I guess the floor for the deck is pretty high, so that's another reason that I'm pretty into it. I think like the worst matchups are probably Lands and then Storm and Sneak and Show. Well, maybe Lands is really bad, but I think the other two are still winnable, even though they're kind of hard matchups.
But are people still playing Lands? I'm not even sure. Like even Jarvis doesn't play it. I think you actually played against Jarvis, and he tried to steal your money. Isn't that true?
Yeah,
there's some word on the street about that.
He did. He offered to split round 6, and I no-sirred him and then beat him, so that felt pretty good. It always feels good to no-sir Jarvis. But in terms of what you were asking earlier, are people still playing Lands? People are definitely still playing it. It's putting up some results in my metagame tracking. It's around like 2 to 2.5%, which is, it's not nothing. It's definitely like a lot less than it was in its heyday, but it's definitely a deck people still play. And so Dave Long, actually, he was in prime position to top 8 the Open. He was 10-1, and then he lost 4 win-in a rows, or one of them was a draw, but he played against Lands 3 times and Black-Red Reanimator once. So he had 4 win-ins basically, and none of them went his way. So it was kind of a rough tournament for him towards the end.
And he also didn't play Lands anymore, right? So he played this depth version.
Yeah, he played the deck I played, Slow Depths. He was not playing Dark Confidant though, but I was, and I think Dark Confidant's excellent. The reason I play it is it's basically one of these cards where it's like either the best card in the matchup or it's like kind of a liability. It's a liability against Delver, it's a liability against Ren and 6, but against other stuff like Tundra and Death and Taxes and Combo, it's insane. So I played 2, maybe I'll play 3 at some point, but I think I'm happy just to play this card. And sometimes they don't have Ren and 6, and it's still insane if you get 2 cards out of it and you don't really care. But I do side it out against Ren and 6 decks, so.
Yeah, makes sense. Eric, how do you like all the different versions? Is Slow Depth where you want to be, or is, for example, a deck that we've seen a lot previously of, the Hogak version with Stitcher Supplier and Satyr Wayfinder? That version has kind of disappeared right now.
Yeah, it seems like people aren't really playing it. I played that one a little bit. I feel like Depths is in probably the best place I think it's ever been as far as I can see, because I've played it from time to time, even when other people have said it's good, and I've been like, this isn't really where I want to be. But right now, I think the deck lines up really, really well against almost everything. And I guess I don't fully understand the nuances of the different decks, so I don't really know which one I think is the best. But when I played the Hogak one, I was winning with it, and that's like the first time I've been really, really winning, not like struggling to get 3-2s with the Depths deck.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I played the Hogak deck as well, I think like 10% at best of my wins came from actually casting Hogak, and most of the time it really was just trying to outplay my opponent with the Marut Large token. And every time I did that, I felt like maybe we can really cut that and play basically what Bob is playing, the Slow Depth version.
Well, so Hogak has some advantages. It basically forces your opponents to sort of respect the graveyard angle. So when I was playing that deck, I had also had a very, very good run with that deck, and I was like, oh wow, this deck is broken. I posted on Twitter that I said, like, one day I think Hogak might get banned in Legacy, but I think I'm going to retract that statement because I think the all-in Hogak deck is very weak to Chalice of the Void, and then the Hogak Depths deck is very weak to Caracas. So I think there are tools. I think Hogak's a very powerful card. It's like, it's a 0 mana 8/8 trample, but it does have some vulnerabilities. But the advantage of that deck is that your opponents are forced to respect the graveyard angle. So what happened a lot was my Chalice opponents would side in Leyline of the Void, or my blue opponents would side in Surgical Extraction. And against Leyline of the Void, I would usually board out my Stitcher Suppliers because they were the worst card. So if they open on Leyline, then yeah, maybe I would have some Hogaks left in my deck and it would be a dead card, but then they also have a dead card because it does nothing against the Depths combo. So there's that piece. And then I also, like against Surgical Extraction, you usually can't Surgical Hogak anyways. So I thought it forced your opponents to play bad cards against you, so you could get an edge that way.
Yeah, that's definitely a big upside when you play a deck that has not a super central, graveyard-centric approach to it, but still just enough so your opponent might bring in hate for it. It always puts people like in a weird position. I mentioned this with Elves, for example, before when it comes to strategic sideboarding, where I used to bring in Meekstone when they hadn't had a Braid yet, so they would need to bring in something like Ancient Grudge, which by itself is like horrible against Elves, but since Meekstone had such a huge impact, they kind of needed to bring that in, and then a lot of times they just like had the stat card. And it's similar when you have, for example, a graveyard angle, while also not fully relying on it. Because you mentioned you would take out Suggest Supplier, but you can still keep Satyr Wayfinder, which finds your combo. And while it also fuels stealth, that's like just a bonus that you get on top. So I see the advantages, but I would also gravitate towards this version because I'm not even sure, is this version better in the depth mirror? At least I felt like I was disadvantaged when I played Hogak Depth against Slow Depth, because Slow Depth actually had Sylvan Library, or in your case, Dark Confidence, and those cards actually eventually got me.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think you could build Hogak Depth to be fine in the mirror. Like, the key cards are Elvish Reclaimer and Karakas, so you could play those main. And then most matchups are going to come down to Dark Depths. One additional advantage of Hogak Depths is you could do something like play 3 Pithing Needle in the sideboard, which is what I was doing, and then just start needling all the combo pieces and then go for Hogak instead.
Oh, that's smart.
So I think there is some play to it. I don't think it's necessarily worse in the mirror, but that being said, I think the depth angle is just the more powerful angle. You get more supporting cards around it. You get to play Confidants, you get to play more Abrupt Decay's main deck, which is really important for the Moon Stompy matchup. So I think you're just a more focused deck, basically. It's kind of like what Eric was saying before, where the hybrid decks like win a lot at first, but then once people figure out the best way to attack them, you're usually better off going to the more focused version of the deck.
One more question about the mirror, because this actually came up for me. Do you side out Dark Depth? Because my opponent almost kind of condescendingly told me after I had beat him that apparently I wasn't very experienced in the matchup, which is true, because I didn't side out my Dark Depth, and he apparently sided out all but one Dark Depth, and because it's so scary if you run it out and your opponent has a Thespian stage and copies it. Is it something you do, or is it just like some crazy thing in the head of my opponent?
That is a relic of the lands days, where in lands mirrors, I 100% agree, you only want 1, maybe 2 Dark Depths in your deck, because making the 2020 is just, it's suicidal, because it's not only just Karakas, Maze of Ith, there's just like so many things that like stop it, so that's not what the matchup is about at all. The matchup is usually about Life from the Loam. So I 100% agree, in lands mirrors you're supposed to side it out. In Dark Depths mirrors, it's not like that. You only have Crop Rotation, Wasteland, and Karakas as interaction pieces. And so if you're able to just strip those pieces or Wasteland those pieces, whoever makes the combo first wins. So I keep in all my Dark Depths.
Okay, makes sense. And why would you play this over the, I guess you would call it, all-in-depth version, which also exists? I guess
Turbo Depth.
I think one of the main differences is they also play 4 Elvish Spirit Guides, and that's pretty much it, I guess. They probably don't play Confidence in 7 libraries.
Yeah, they usually don't. So that version, I think, is a little bit stronger against Delver. You get to play main deck Pithing Needles, but the problem with that version is it's significantly weaker to lands, Death and Taxes, Miracles, like all the stuff that Dark Depths is weak to. It doesn't really have any supporting cards around. You're playing like these horrible cards like Elvish Spirit Guide or Into the North. Yeah, you have some cards like Not of This World that can maybe steal a game for you, but they're just bad magic cards, whereas in Slow Depths, you're playing cards like Dark Confidant, Sylvan Library. Eventually, you'll draw enough cards that these blue decks, you can actually just, outvalue them and outgrind them. So that's the cool thing about the slow version of the deck, is it actually has some inevitability against a lot of blue decks.
Pretty sweet. I think this is actually something I would look into going forward, because honestly, I feel a little bit homeless in Legacy right now, ever since I think the last MKM where I didn't play Elves was actually the first MKM in years that I didn't play Elves in the main event. And it still felt kind of weird, but also, I don't even want to say liberating, because I still enjoy playing Elves and I like play it every once in a while, but right now, it's just, when you play a different deck and you see, hey, I don't have to worry about Plague Engineers and Renin 6s, it's just so nice. And Elvish Reclaimer is a really sweet card.
What's funny is those 2 cards are still relevant against Slow Depths. They're not as punishing. I guess, but they're still, reasonable cards in the matchup. But that is what I kind of want to talk about for our next topic, which is Renin 6 and to a lesser extent Plague Engineer. We've already talked about these cards a fair amount, but one thing I think we didn't talk about is how the metagame is adapting to Renin 6, and I think it's pretty interesting. So the way I see Renin 6 now is it is a very powerful card in the blue mirror, and it's good against certain decks. For example, Elves and Death and Taxes. But it's become so prevalent, and it's so good in the mirror that, like, in the Delver mirror, it's 100% about Renin 6, because whoever has, more Wastelands usually wins. So these blue decks are forced to play Renin 6 to keep up with each other, but they're not very good against combo decks, and they're not very good against random decks with a bunch of basic lands or that don't have that many creatures. Decks like Bomberman, which I guess maybe sort of is a combo deck, but you see my point where there are these non-blue decks that get to almost ignore Renin 6, and these blue decks are forced to play Renin 6. So it's a situation like Vintage where the blue decks are faced to play Mental Misstep and Pyroblast, which are really bad against workshops, but every blue player has them, so you just have to play them, otherwise you'll be behind against the majority of decks which are blue. So I think Renin 6 is having a very similar effect in Legacy, and I think it's making combo decks that don't care about Renin 6 better than ever. And in my metagame tracking, not only is Dark Depths better than ever, but just combo in general is putting up more finishes than ever before. So curious to see if you guys have any takes on that. I don't know, Eric, if you have any thoughts.
I did notice that Reanimator's starting to put up more results.
Yeah, and Reanimator's like the combo killer, so it's like if combo is good, then
Reanimator's really good. But I also think it's because people that at like the SCG circuit are finally saying, oh, hey, I think it looks good in this metagame, so I'm going to play it. But I think if they had played it 6 months ago or a year ago, they would have had a lot of success with it as well. But I agree with you. I agree with what you're saying, for sure.
Yeah, a couple good friends of mine, like Will Pulliam, he played Black Red Reanimator. I think Collins Mullen top baited with it. So yeah, to your point, some better players picked up the deck and had some results.
Yeah, exactly what I've been saying will happen. So I guess this is the metagame that made people think it's time to start playing it, for the reasons that you just mentioned, which I agree with.
Yeah, I wonder whether Black Red Reanimator has actually managed to shake off that stigma of being the quote-unquote stupid deck, which I think it never really has been. But when it first came up, people were like, oh, this is Black-Red version of Belcher or something. And now that it has actually arrived in the metagame and found its place, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty complex deck, and it was interesting seeing some of the different lists that people came up with for the finishes, their top 8s and challenges, and then the SCG and stuff in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I definitely noticed when I watch you playing Black Red Reanimator, you're playing this with a very different approach than I would put on, but also something very different from what I see local players, because a lot of times local players, they really literally just go all in. They're like, okay, I have this, let's try. And it has more interesting, especially after sideboarding play to it, than I would think. I think I ask you this almost every cast, but this is still something that this would be your number one consideration for the GP next month, right?
Yeah, I'm going to an MCQ this weekend too that I'll be playing it in. And yeah, the one thing that I will say I've noticed, so I have like a Discord and things like that, and people have said the number one thing that's helped them improve from learning how I play it is just wait. Usually just wait, unless there's a reason not to wait anymore, like Arcanist or whatever against a blue deck. It's like waiting is no longer a good option if Arcanist is in play, that sort of thing. And
you feel really good about it in the local meta, in the current metagame. What are you struggling with? Because the way Bob paints out the metagame, it seems to be all these Renin 6 decks, which I guess you wouldn't care much about, but then also a ton of Stompy and combo decks.
I've been beating pretty much everything except for Delver decks, which is funny because historically I've been pretty good against Delver decks, but recently I don't know if it's variance and luck or not, but I've been losing to Delver decks more than I'm used to.
Well, do you think it's Dreadhorde Arcanist forcing you to go off earlier?
No, it's like my opponents have 4 soft counters in a Wasteland or something like that. I actually have changed the main deck a little bit as well, too. I changed it for a while because Narset was a problem, and then people basically stopped playing Narset, and so I've now changed it for... I've put Elish Norn back in the main deck. I haven't done quite enough testing.
A lot of people mentioned how they don't really like Narset in either the Delver decks, their Miracle decks, or their Stoneblade decks. Everybody's been talking about how they are cutting Narset, which is kind of funny because a month or two ago, she was all the rage, and everybody wanted 3 Narsets in their main deck. But, yeah, I mean, the card... It gives you card advantage, but it's also kind of slowish and rather hard to protect since she doesn't really do much for that and ticks down really low.
Well, I think too many people just started playing Lightning Bolt and Dreadhorde Arcanist and Delver, so I think that was the main impetus for Narset to to go down, and Karn as well. But now we're basically, honestly, only 2 Chalice decks have been putting up big results, and it's Moonstompy and Bomberman. And both of those decks are very different, and they're more focused around just getting ahead super early with like a super powerful mana advantage. So that's interesting direction. And I think they're like better Chalice decks too than like Eldrazi Stompy, which is, it just does less powerful things. Turn 2 Thought-Knots here, a blue deck can kind of keep pace with that, but turn 1 Blood Moon or like turn 1 Mentor plus a bunch of baubles, blue decks can't keep up at all.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Bomberman, because I think that deck is really, really good and even better than people think right now. And I believe part of the reason is how expensive it is in Magic Online. I think it's over 700 ticks in Magic Online, and it's the only deck that I sometimes didn't play just because it didn't have enough. I've got this sponsorship thing going on where I can always borrow cards up until 500 ticks. And when I don't always have like the extra cards to make that deck. And I guess a lot of people feel the same, or they don't even get the deck in the first place because it's this expensive. And I think if more people played it, and if it wasn't so annoying to play at times on Magic Online because of the infinite combo, we would see even more results out of that deck. And if it was up to me, if you wanted a recommendation from me what to play right now, it would definitely be Bomberman. I think Bomberman is really, really good. Bomberman, slow depth, this is where I want to be in Legacy right now. And one of the reasons for that being why I think Bomberman is so good is that the deck is, like you mentioned, it puts a lot of pressure on the opponent on different angles. For example, there's the combo take that a lot of people are familiar with, where you loop Lions of Diamond and then eventually kill your opponent with Walking Ballista. But you also have the beatdown angle. So if your opponent brings in, like, I don't know, ley lines or anything that touches the graveyard, you can just beat that by playing turn 1 or turn 2 Mentor and running them over with your Mentor tokens. Or you go the Planeswalker route, where you quickly accelerate out a Planeswalker like Karn. I saw Manguchi play the other day, and he got turn 2 Lattice on the play. What is the opponent even supposed to do? That's almost nothing they can do. It's kind of crazy. And on top of that, if you don't go for combo, if you don't go for beatdown, if you don't go for Planeswalkers, because for whatever reason that's shut down, you can still grind out the opponent. Given not as good as other decks, but certainly to a certain degree where it becomes relevant, where you play your Bomberman, your Auriok Salvagers, and you keep rebuying your baubles from the graveyard, which gives you like quite a lot of card advantage. And in the grindy mid-range matchups, that actually becomes a thing. So I'm in love with the deck. I really think it's very, very good.
Yeah, I think it's a good deck for you. It's sort of similar to Elves.
Kinda, yeah.
That you make a lot of things happen, and then you sort of get a lot of card advantage, and you just have like these big combo turns. I do want to touch on the card advantage piece some more, because I alluded to this on Twitter, but Mystic Forge, holy crap, is that card insane. Every time it's been in play against me, it's drawn like 3 cards for the first turn that they play it, and that's when they have 0 or 1 mana up. And I mean, maybe I got unlucky, but like my experience playing against the card is that card is bonkers. It's more powerful than like Experimental Frenzy because you get the pay 1 life angle, and I was just been seriously impressed with that card to the point where I think it's a better 4 mana card advantage engine than Jason the Mind Sculptor.
That's a pretty high benchmark if you're comparing it against Chase and it comes out ahead. But I agree, the card produces a ton of card advantage. And there's actually even cute stuff that you can pull. For example, if you run into something you think you can't cast, you can actually still cast it using Lions of Diamond, which is kind of funny. It's absolutely crazy. And if you get it out on turn 2, which the deck can easily do, the opponent doesn't really have too many ways to interact with it. You can Abrupt Decay it. Even if you revoke it, you can still cast a card from the top of your library. So I guess I can see the comparison to Chase and it coming out ahead, because Chase can be at least attacked and taken out that way or pyroblasted, whereas Mystic Forge just sits there and laughs and stares at the opponent. So which decks would you like more? Would you rather be playing Moonstompy right now, or would you rather play Bomberman? Because Moonstompy also has put up a lot of results. If you look at the Legacy MCQ that took place 2 weeks ago, well, on Magic Online, I was trying to figure out, okay, where did it actually happen? It put 3 Moonstompy decks in the top 8. And for those who don't know, there's Legacy Mythic Championship qualifiers, which are like PTQs, and that's a really big thing. I don't remember how many people signed up for that, but it was like a couple hundred at least. And yeah, our friend Rich Shea made it all the way to the finals playing Moonstompy, as well as 2 other guys. I mean, that's a pretty good showing from the deck. Once again, after already having put up a lot of results lately.
I personally am a little bit surprised at all the results that it's put up. I've tried it recently because of the results, and I feel like Moonstompy leans extremely heavily on lock pieces, and so like Moon and Chalice, and if those aren't good enough, then you usually lose. Because if they can, like, say, ignore them or abrupt decay them and then counter your threat, you're often just at the mercy of the top of your deck. And like a lot of the times, if those cards aren't good, you're drawing those cards and they're still not good. So I don't know. I didn't have success with it recently when I've tried it, and I'm a little surprised that it's putting up so many results right now.
Yeah, I tested Moonstompy really heavily last week because I was like, oh wow, it seems super well positioned again, and it has been putting up so many results. And I think some people know that it's putting up results, but it actually is the deck with the most results since the release of M20. It's about 8.5% of the format. Which, by the way, I also just want to say this is probably the most diverse Legacy has ever been. There's only, out of the decks putting up results, only like 55% of them play Brainstorm, so that's also kind of crazy. Usually it's closer to like 70%. So, I mean, we've seen this trend over the past couple of years now where the Brainstorm decks aren't as good as they used to be. And I would almost go the other way now where people are asking me what to play, and I'm like, I would not play any Ren and 6 decks, and I would not play any decks that are bad against the Ren and 6 decks. So if you can fulfill those two rules, I think there are a lot of good decks to kind of choose from. But yeah, I played Moonstompy, and I didn't like it because I was playing against a lot of random decks. Maybe this is something you guys run to as well, because I don't play that many leagues, but I probably played, 5 or 6 leagues, and I was keeping track, like 25% of the time I was playing against just like nonsense decks. Like I played against Soul Herder, which I saw it 5-0'd. I played against, some Illyrian decks, which, they're like sort of decks, but not really. I played against Ninja decks, which is, again, sort of a deck, but not really. There's so many decks that are like playable in Legacy. I'd say there's like maybe like 20 good decks. And then on top of that, there's 70 somewhat playable deck, Soul Herder. Like it's so crazy.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what, to me, is the most fun about playing Moonstompy? To me, it's not about the lock pieces or like stealing wins with the turn 1 Blood Moon. I just like going turn 1 Goblin into turn 2 Goblin and racing my opponent really hard, because that just feels like so good. The opponent is like, I have this and I have that, and I don't care about Chalice. I'm like, yeah, well, guess what? I don't care about anything you have. I just attack you for like, I don't know, lethal on turn. But potentially 3, I guess, if you get 3 Goblins. I don't even know. Yeah, that would probably be like the dream.
Yeah, you can kill on turn 3 with just Goblins, which is kind of wild. Because you're a lock piece deck and you can kill on turn 3. So
yeah, maybe my approach is wrong.
You're not playing it as aggressively?
I don't know. I felt like I'm mulligan hands that don't have. I don't know. I haven't played it enough.
That's the main skill with the deck, obviously, and I think that's one reason why Rich was very good at it, because he's played a lot of workshops, and it's all about the mulliganing and figuring out what matters in each matchup. Here's the other thing I didn't like about Moonstompy is I feel like most of your matchups are like, instead of 50-50, they're like 70-30 matchups. You're pretty ahead against decks like Delver, and against most combo decks you're pretty ahead as well. But then against decks with Stoneforge Mystic, you were just like so far behind. Against Sneak and Show, I also felt like you were really far behind. Like, yeah, you could maybe win with Ensnaring Bridge, but most of the time it was your log pieces did literal nothing. Like Chalice, Blood Moon, Trinisphere do almost nothing.
That's what I'm running into. So. It's like, my Blood Moon does nothing. I can't play it, and I have to keep bad cards in my deck because I don't have enough cards for like a Stoneforge Mystic deck. I just don't have them. So what are you doing with your Blood Moons and things like that?
Yeah, I think especially something like Blue-White Stoneblade would be a big problem for the deck, which, to be honest, hasn't really been a big thing up until very recently. But during the last week especially, we saw a lot of Blue-White Stoneblade. And I think I want to talk about that later on, but we can also go ahead right to this part. If we look at the last couple of events, we saw Tamir 13-13 split the Legacy finals against the Legacy MCQ finals against Rich. Or we had Jackson Baum in the top 4 of the Legacy Classic. We have Philip van Donsala, I'm so sorry for mispronouncing your name, who won the most recent Legacy Challenge. And 2 more guys actually put Blue-White Stoneblade into the top 8 of the Legacy Challenge. So is this the big comeback of Stoneforge Mystic that was promised? I don't know, but I see a lot and like a big rise of Blue-White Stoneblade right now. And I'm usually hesitant to say, oh yeah, this happened because during the previous weeks that happened, because Legacy isn't that fluid. I mean, online, yeah, to a certain degree, but definitely not on paper. A lot of people don't get to change up their decks every week. I guess something like Miracles would easily flow into Blue-White Stoneblade. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot of Blue-White Stoneblade right now, and I'm wondering why that is. We were earlier talking about, on previous episodes, how Tundra has become a much less played dual land, and Swords of Plowshares isn't that big of a thing, which definitely helps all the depth strategies that we have seen. But yeah, now it seems to be back. How do you guys feel about that deck? Because I have very strong opinions about Blue-White Stoneblade decks in general, but How do you guys feel about those decks right now?
I guess maybe it has something to do with mono red putting up results, blue white, because that was another thing I was a little surprised at. That it's like, I think, was it just one or was it two recent events on Magic Online that there was one by blue white?
So it was two. So like it just won the MCQ
right, yeah.
and the most recent challenge. So yeah, like maybe it was a reaction somewhat to Moonstompy being popular. So I definitely buy that, but I think I'm in the same camp as Julian. I just don't understand why people play the deck. It just seems really bad to me. I guess people just like playing fair cards with Brainstorm, and sometimes they don't want to play Delver Secrets. And so that's why decks like, the Snow deck or Grixis Control or Stoneblade, I think they're always overrepresented for their win rate. They're the classic 45% deck that quote-unquote grinders / good players, but I don't even want to call it good players. They're just mediocre players who think they're good. They like to play it because it gives them the illusion of control.
You call it the grinders.
Yeah, I mean, well, I like to I'm friends with a lot of grinders, and I think they have enough sense not to play these kinds of decks. I think Magic has evolved to a point where in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, maybe a couple years ago, you were better off playing your cantrips and brainstorms and being fair, but now I think it's evolved to a point where like you want to do something super powerful, just smack your opponent in the face and make sure that they get crushed by you, rather than trying to like match everything lockstep and eke out incremental advantages. Like that's not what Magic's about anymore. It's more like battle cruisers.
What's the battlecruiser of blue-white Stoneblade? I think they don't really have like anything battlecruisery going on. Like if Batterskull is your battlecruiser, that doesn't really seem like a big thing. Like I guess Julian Nemesis and putting equipment on that, but like you mentioned, is this really what Legacy is about these days? I don't know. It doesn't feel powerful enough. As much as I despise these kind of mid-range decks, those decks, they like to call themselves control decks, but I think they're much more like mid-range decks. I can see the appeal, especially when it comes to stuff like you often only need 2 Tundras and you can still play it. And it plays a lot of basics. And people really, really love playing basics in Legacy, right? So I guess that's why people will also gravitate towards that. And yeah, with all the talk about how depth is good, it's also kind of nice to have Swords of Plowshares as an answer, even though that sometimes actually is a little bit lackluster in the face of safekeepers and stuff. But yeah, it's something that's definitely back. And that should be on your radar right now, and something that you should try to... I don't even want to say try to beat, because this is not a deck that you can actually target with anything, because they don't have like anything that sticks out. A lot of, I don't know, 6 out of 10 cards, okay, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, it's not bad, it's also not outstanding. But yeah, if you're a fan of blue-white Stoneblade, I'm sorry. Let us know in the comments what you think about the deck. I think it's playable, but like Bob mentioned, it's the most recent results prove me wrong. But I want to say that's the kind of deck you pick up if you don't really want to win the tournament. after we just talked about how it won the last 2 big tournaments on Magic Online.
I mean, I think maybe, Julian, you and I have similar biases, and those biases are against these kinds of blue soup mid-range decks. And so maybe we need to get someone who's really into those decks to talk about why they're good. One of our good friends who we had on right after you won GP Niagara Falls, Daniel Gochel. He's an excellent Magic player. Played Blue White Stoneblade, won the tournament. He plays a lot of different decks in Legacy. And for whatever reason, like there are certain time periods where he's like, yeah, I want to play Blue White Stoneblade because it's the best Ponder deck against Chalice decks.
The best Ponder deck against Chalice decks. Okay, that's an interesting take.
Yeah, so if we're in a metagame where like Chalice is everywhere somehow, then I can see it being reasonable. But come on, there's always going to be more Ponder decks than Chalice decks. So
just find it funny when you come into a tournament and you're like, I want to be the best Ponder deck I can be. Sorry.
I have an idea. I think people play it because it's fun.
Is it really?
It is pretty fun. It leads to fun games of Magic. I played it recently because I went to an LGS, which I don't do that frequently, and I meant to bring Grixis Delver, and I accidentally grabbed Reanimator, and I didn't want to play Reanimator, so I borrowed blue-white Stoneblade, and the deck felt bad to me. I mean, so I borrowed it from somebody who has decks to loan, so it wasn't like optimally built. It was, they don't tune it weekly or anything like that, so it may not have been optimal, but it felt clunky and bad, but I had some really, really fun interactive games of Magic. I played against Elves, and we had like a crazy match, and all 3 games were really fun. I played against Mono Red Eldrazi, which is, it's like a Blood Sun deck. So that made some interesting games as well, even though, like we just mentioned, this would probably be the best Ponder deck against Chalice deck, so that was helpful. And then the last round I played against 4-color Delver, and I got completely destroyed, and that wasn't very fun. But the first 2 rounds were like super fun, even though I didn't really like the deck that much. But the deck led to
actual games of Magic.
Interactive, fun games.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good point. I played a lot of Maverick this week and the previous week, and I noticed that my games against Blue-White Stoneblade, they always last super, super long, and they're super interactive, they're super interesting, and from both sides. So it wasn't like me blowing them out and then slowly grinding them out. It was like a back and forth, and you were trying to get a leg up on the other guy, and it was so much fun.
Exactly
it actually came down to timing out quite a lot. Like, I've had some game once that took up to 40 minutes, because once you manage to deal with each other's equipment, it's actually kind of hard. Like, eventually they get True Name Nemesis, but sometimes it can't even attack because you have this big knight that threatens to swing back. So you have to find Mother to attack through it, but you can't always untap with a Mother against them. So it's definitely a deck that makes for a lot of amazing magic. That I gotta say that, yes. That's definitely true. I can see the appeal of that, for sure. Man, now I actually want to try
it. We're going to make a Jace player out of you yet, Julian.
Well, I played my fair share of Jace. I might have mentioned this before, but I once did an analysis of all my sanctioned matches and Magic tournaments, and by this time, actually like 10, 15 years, actually, my first sanctioned event was 2005. Anyway, so yeah, in Legacy, Elves up front, like by far, and then Miracles is actually my second most played deck in Legacy set and sanctioned tournaments.
That makes sense. That deck was so good for so long, but kind of still on the Stoneblade topic, like, Eric, how do you see Blue-White Stoneblade as being different from like a Stoneblade deck you have liked in the past, which is, decks like Bant Stoneblade, where that was a deck with Noble Hierarch and Deathrite Shamans, more acceleration, more of a proactive game plan, I guess. But
that's a really easy question to answer. The biggest problem that I had when I was playing it is I felt like the mana is so awful. Personally, I don't like playing with basics. I feel like I'd much rather be wastelanded so that I can't cast my spells than not be able to cast my spells because I'm playing a bunch of basics in my deck. Double blue, double white spells, and just like it's really hard to set up, and with Snapcaster and things like that. And the Bant Stoneblade deck had basically pretty close to perfect mana as long as you could play one of your 8 mana dorks.
Yeah, that's something I look for as well, which is a deck with a good mana base. Which, funnily enough, I don't think Depths has a good mana base, which is why sometimes I try to look for a different deck. Because you play 13 green sources, including the Mox Diamonds, and there are some matchups where you really don't want Mox Diamond because the games go long and you just don't want 30 lands in your deck. So that is the one thing I wish I could make better with Depths is I want more green mana, but I don't want to play extra lands because you're already playing so many.
Yeah, so that's the main thing for me is mana bases. I tried Snow Control today for the first time, and the same thing. That's kind of what I thought was going to happen going in. It feels like playing these basics in this Astrolabe actually just makes the mana way wonkier.
I think that's what Daryl found too. Is he's still playing Astrolabe, but he cut down on the number of basics. He usually plays 3 to 4, which is a little bit. It's still a lot, but it's a little bit less than what a lot of other players do. And what he does is he doesn't play Prismatic Vista, so he doesn't fetch the basic lands unless he has Astrolabe. When he has Astrolabe, he's like, yeah, I'll go ahead and fetch all the basics because the mana's perfect. But then in other situations, he'll just fetch dual lands and play through Wasteland instead.
But then you can't play your Astrolabe when you draw it.
It's true. I mean, like, the deck definitely has some issues. I mean, you can usually find a fetch land to find a basic, but yeah.
Yeah, it was the Vista that made the mana feel particularly bad for me.
Eventually, we're all gonna arrive at what Thomas Mar is doing in Legacy, and that's no basics, all duels, no Astrolabe, just you have Blood Moon, whatever, I don't care, then I just lose. But if you don't, then I'm gonna have the most powerful deck.
I'm on board with that. I don't want any basics in almost any of my decks except for Reanimator, because you only need 1 color usually.
That guy, I can't even say that little guy, because I've known him for a couple of years now, and he's almost doubled in size. Not horizontally, like vertically. Ever since. So he's like almost as tall as I am, I think, when previously he was like half as tall as I am. Anyway, I still want to say, that little guy, he's the living embodiment of greed in Legacy, and I think that's so cool. I know you guys know that he's basically the guy that Jack Pyle is named after, and that just happened because the deck started out as a Delver deck, and he kept adding so much value to his Delver deck, like Sylvan Libraries, Chases, Color Guns Command. Eventually, he just got rid of Delver because he was like, okay, I got like all this power in my hand, and I imagine him like flames in his eyes and like lifting his arms, like, yes, I want the power. And he literally like cramps every single piece of technology into that deck. and plays Wastelands. He would probably even play 5 colors if there was anything worth on white to splash for. And to me, that's just like so appealing. He's the embodiment of 80s or 90s villain if Legacy was a movie or like a series. If this was Yu-Gi-Oh, he would be like this super all-powerful guy that wants the world dominant. Actually, I'm actually fetishizing this part almost. That sounds really weird. Anyway, but yeah, I like the approach of I want to be really powerful, and yes, I will lose to certain stuff, but if you don't have that, I will have the best deck. And he used to have issues, I think, with getting a little bit salty, and I heard him many times say, I have so many good cards, how can I lose? Like, I managed to beat him with Miracles at one time, a couple of years ago, and that's literally what he told me. My cards are also good, how can I lose to you? Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to get back to that. Maybe that's the next evolution for Snow, because honestly, like, as much hype as 4-color Snow kind of was, it hasn't really put up that great results. You see it's around, but it never really feels like it's getting to the very top. And like Eric mentioned, it's struggling with its mana sometimes even. Do you think this deck is, like, it's definitely here to stay, but do you think it's as good as advertised?
Definitely not. It definitely has not been putting up the results. Like I said earlier, people just flock to play these fair blue Ponder Brainstorm decks, and maybe it is because they find it's fun, maybe it's because they think they're better than they are, but for whatever reason, these decks are just overplayed and underperforming. And I think these decks were good for one specific weekend, which was the weekend of the Star City Open in Philadelphia, and it had some very good results to show for. And I think, if the metagame goes more towards Blue-White Stoneblade again, I think it does make a lot of sense to bring out your Kolaghan's commands to prey on that. But I feel like there are not enough slots in the blue deck sideboards to beat all these random combo decks, unless you're playing a more proactive strategy like Delver. So I'm not a fan of the Jace decks right now, at least as they're currently being constructed. I guess Blue-White Stoneblade is a little bit better than some of the nonsense, because it's really good against the Chalice nonsense, at least, but I don't think it's very good against combo. So
yeah, sorry, I agree completely. And I love having perfect mana with dual lands and fetches and playing super value cards. The only thing about deck building that I disagree there is I like to close out the game. I like to have things that close out the game. So I built a 4-color deck recently that I've been playing a little bit, and the main difference is, there's no Astrolabe, so I have like a ton more slots to put things in my deck. And so I included one thing that I think is super real, and that is Cephalid Coliseum and Narset. I actually think Narset's quite good right now. It's not that great against Delver, but it's pretty good against everything else. And it gives you game against a lot of things that you just generally don't, because you have an I win button, and those decks usually don't.
Oh, that's actually really cute. So you would buy back your Colosseum with Red and 6 and then activate it on the opponent's turn to make them discard 3 cards?
Yeah, they actually don't get to cast any more spells if they have less than 3 cards in their hand.
Oh, so because you do it on their draw step, so they can only ever cast instants, I guess?
No, they can't even. They have to already have it.
I need to tell this to Anurag, because I'm sure he's going to try it.
Once you do it in their upkeep, so they draw 3 cards, but they only draw 1, and then they have to discard 3, so they don't actually get to cast any spells. If you do it in their upkeep, not their draw step, they don't get to cast any more spells, so the game's over. It's a good way to beat a lot of stuff.
Oh my god, Anurag, how Bob mentioned that, right? He thought adding Lonely Sandbar was the next level, but Cephalid Coliseum, that's literally the game ends unless they, I don't know, have some graveyard interaction or something. It's wild.
And I also have Days Undoing. That one I'm not going to say is great, but it's another way to okay, you're playing against Dredge, you're never going to beat this matchup, but if you can get Leovold or Narset into play before they have some sort of lethal thing, then you can win by casting Days Undoing. But that one's for fun.
Man, that's actually super sweet. I wonder if you're going to see more of that. Because, we mentioned, Anurag has stopped playing Miracles, which all by itself is kind of like a miracle right now, even though he still plays Terminus.
No, he didn't even play Terminus this week. I don't know if you guys saw his deck, but it was just an abomination. It played a bunch of different Planeswalkers. It played 3 Humility to go with Ren and 6, which I respect that. But then he played 1 Karn the Great Creator, and he still had a small wish board for it. Can you imagine playing 1 Karn the Great Creator? In what world is that possibly correct?
Honest question. Is he losing it?
I think he is. I think he was telling me in confidence that he's like, Bob, I don't know if I can play Miracles in Atlanta. It's never been this bad. It was kind of not great in Atlanta or in Niagara Falls, but he still managed to do really well with it. but now he's the rest of the format has just powered up, and Miracles doesn't necessarily have the right tools to keep up with everything. Like Miracles is the epitome of the blue deck that tries to keep up with everything and outvalue you, but it doesn't really have good answers for permanence. Like there's Council Judgment, but it's so clunky, and yeah, he's definitely been struggling. So that's why he's been trying these weird run and 6 brews.
My take on Miracles is that it had 2 major benefits. One, the basics and back to basics. Like you can run a bunch of basics and back to basics. So that's one major benefit. And the other one is Terminus. And that's like your answer to all the creatures and stuff. But now Renin 6 makes it so that it kind of plays that role of back to basics. Like you have this mana advantage with Renin 6. And it also kills things. And you have Plague Engineer. So you have, between Renin 6 and Plague Engineer, you fill both of those roles. And you get to play all these black cards. So yeah, that's my take, why people are not playing Miracles.
Yeah, so to me, like Miracles almost like, it's kind of funny how we are talking about that Miracles is being overpowered, like how it's not powerful enough, because like a couple of years ago, Miracles was like one of the most powerful decks in the history of Legacy, and that's still probably one of the most dominant periods of Legacy at all. But right now, it almost like strikes me as this retired sports star who still like hangs around and tries to be relevant, but it's just, like they're not cutting it anymore. They're like 35, 36 years old, and they try to hang with the young boys, but that they don't have the tactics and the speed, and it's a disgrace. They should have retired like 2 years ago. That's what Miracles looks like right now.
Ouch.
I'm sorry. I don't even hate the deck. Ever since Top was banned, I actually, in my head, I have like the good side and the bad side, like the good and the evil side of Legacy. And ever since Top was banned, Miracles went straight into the good side and was like one of the good guys. But now it needs a lot of help, and we can't always send enough help to it. And yeah, so now people are dropping it, and they're not wearing their Miracles jerseys anymore. They're wearing like their snow color jerseys, and it's like, yeah. And Miracles keeps talking about how great it once was, and people still play it. And I'm sorry, Miracles. You will definitely be back, I guess. Terminus is still one hell of a card, but not right now.
But is it? It's like a Plague Engineer that you have to like set up.
Yeah, and yeah. It's kind of funny. Like mid-range random creature stuff isn't as relevant anymore. So like Terminus doesn't, like if you Terminus or Marret Large, that's like, I guess it's fine that you manage to deal with Marret Large, but usually, like you mentioned, it also requires a lot of setup. So it's, I don't know. Doesn't strike me as that great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the deal with Terminus, like I was saying, is you have this 1 mana sweeper that can deal with like 4 creatures at once, which is like a big deal. But now with Renin 6, I mean, if you kill 1 Delver, they're not playing any more Delvers until they deal with your Renin 6. And then it deals, and then like Plague Engineer deals with True Name Nemesis, so you don't really need Terminus.
You know which deck Terminus is actually really good against? It's one of the decks that 11 episodes ago, Bob actually predicted to maybe be really good in Legacy since it got a new printing. And Bob, do you know which deck I'm talking about?
Slivers, baby. Let's go.
I think you might have actually called it the best tribal deck in Legacy right now, which I would be offended by.
It's actually putting up results still because it doesn't care about Renin 6, and it like obviously you care about Plague Engineer, but like you have so many lords that you just play through it.
Yeah,
I'm gonna play it.
This list that was posted that finished in the I think it finished in the top something of the Legacy MCQ. It finished high enough to be posted, so at least top 32, which given how big the MCQ was is actually quite important. So one card that definitely improved the deck a lot is Cloud Shredder Silver. For a red and a white, a 1/1, and all slivers you control have flying and haste. It's like, we have Gale Rider Sliver for 1 blue, which gives haste, but now we have Cloud Shredder Sliver, which not only has haste. Anyway, totally messed that one up. Gale Rider Sliver gives you flying, and this one gives you flying and haste. So this deck is really super power turbocharged. It also plays 8 lords, plus 2 Phantasmal Image. So yeah, Plague Engineer, they fly over that, and they also have enough lords to often just easily overcome that. And thanks to Crystalline Sliver, those lords also can't really be touched. So,
well, this list is like especially crazy because it's playing a few cards that the regular lists don't play. So that's Force of Will, which is normal, but it's playing Swords to Plowshares and Standstill. So this player is like actually playing a fair game, which I think is interesting. I think that one of the draws of Slivers is that you can never ever erase it if you're playing a fair deck. Almost like you can't ever target their creatures usually, and then their creatures are bigger and faster than yours. So that was the main draw of Slivers to me. And then in return, you kind of gave up your combo matchup. So like I would like to see more cards good against combo. So perhaps something like Force of Negation would make more sense. I don't know Merfolk has adopted that. Like a lot of Merfolk decks play up to like 8 forces now, which I think is interesting. But I don't love this build of Slivers. I think I would try to more go in a anti-combo direction. But Standstill is kind of interesting.
Yeah, they have like 3 one-off slots, Force Spike, Spell Pierce, and Stubborn Denial. And I think you could streamline that a little bit more. Especially Stubborn Denial doesn't feel that great because you need 3 Lords to get a 4-power creature. That seems...
But it's a Force Spike. It is a Force Spike without it, right? Well, kinda, not really.
Okay, yeah. Well.
I actually thought you were saying... when you had this in the show notes, I thought this was Bob's deck. And I was going to be like, Bob, why are you playing... those spells that you just mentioned in Standstill.
Yeah, that's this is a secret identity of Bob, of Sliver Bob. That didn't people call you
Bob?
I just noticed I called you Bok Wang in the show notes. But anyway, didn't people call you Katana Bob? Oh, yes, Sliver Bob.
I have many nicknames.
Yeah,
Official Bob, Katana Bob, Champion of Hearts.
Champion of Hearts. Okay, that sounds like a kind of awkward. Anyway. But yeah, the Sliver list, I think, like you mentioned, it probably needs some streamlining. Also, the mana base looks a bit all over the place. But
yeah, I would not play basic lands and Slivers. I think you're just gonna accept that you're gonna lose the Blood Moon and then just freaking crush people. He's only playing 2 Cavern of Souls, and that's like the other benefit of playing these tribal decks. So I would build it a lot more like humans, but it just goes way bigger than humans. And in return, you get a much worse combo matchup, but then you get much more better against the fair decks. I also don't think Slivers is bad against Miracles because you have access to the Hibernation Sliver, which basically you return all your Slivers to your hand and then cast them again uncounterable. So Terminus is just like a speed bump.
I wonder whether the choice of 2 Caverns is because they're also playing like Swords of Plowshare, Stubborn Denial, Spell Pierce, and Force Spike.
No, I'm sure it is. I'm saying those cards are not really worth playing if you're playing Slivers because you're already ahead against the fair decks.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Like you mentioned, maybe Force of Negation. I don't know if they have a high enough blue count for that. You got Crystalline
They're playing
Sliver.
Force of Will, so they can play Force of Negation.
Yeah, true. It's only going to make it better, right? Yeah. So that's something, the deck is more legit than people give it credit for. Obviously, it's probably not going to be tier 1, but maybe we are even wrong on that, and it's secretly the best deck. But I would love to see more of that. Of course, it's like kind of, I guess the Slivers aren't really that expensive, are they? I was going to say that it's like hard to buy into the deck, but all the cards that actually cost actual cash in the deck you can use for other decks. So maybe we should like try to spike Slivers and become rich of Slivers. It's like
Can we find room for one of those 5 mana Slivers? There's a bunch we could choose from.
Oh my god, like the rainbow ones?
I like the one that does Cascade.
Those are actually really expensive,
your other Slivers are cheap.
Oh, I mean, no, we're not spiking. I just want to add it to the deck.
But why? Imagine
because all your Slivers get Cascade. I don't know. Never mind.
Imagine your Evermile goes to 5 and the look in your opponent's face when you put Sliver Queen into play.
Wait, does Cascade, would that stack? Say you play a 5 mana Sliver and then you hit a 4 mana Sliver. Does the 4 mana Sliver also have Cascade? Because you're casting it.
You're casting
so then
it,
does it Cascade again?
It should, right? Actually, let me look that up.
This is important. This is really important because then that means we have to put more 4 mana Slivers and 3 mana Slivers, not just 2 and 1.
So you can hit your entire deck. But then you can't.
That means if you cast a 5 mana Sliver, you automatically get a 4, 3, 2, and a 1. That's insane.
Yeah, but only if you don't play Otherwise and stuff.
No, also because you can hit a 2 first and then you.
Oh yeah, and then it ends. Done. So yeah, the card is called the First Sliver, and Sliver spells you cast have Cascade, and the card itself has also Cascade. So yeah, they have Cascade. So you cast them off the Cascade, and then you Cascade again.
It doesn't work with Aether Vial though, which is a huge bummer.
All right, we're cutting Aether Vial.
All right, let's add more lands.
In speaking of cutting Ethervial, a deck that came 12th in the Legacy MCQ is one of the most, like if you've been around Legacy, you've known about this deck. I want to call it one of the most controversial decks in Legacy that has created some of the most vile and intense discussion on the source, which I guess at this point you actually got to mention how this is a Legacy forum, the Legacy forum, the most legendary Legacy forum that's still used, but not as much anymore. But anyway, so I don't even know what to say. The original name of that deck was called NoGoif.deck, because back in 2008, when the deck was created, it was just a kind of special thing to play a creature deck without Goif. A more descriptive name of it would be Blue-White Tempo. And boy, does this deck look crazy. First of all, it plays 3 Ether Vials. So it's a blue-white mid-range creature deck, and it plays 3 Ether Vials.
That was the first thing I noticed. I was like, "What? You really needed to make room for the one Sarah Avenger or the one or I don't know,
or the second copy of Fibblethip the Lost. I don't even know how to pronounce that.
The second Fibblethip. I love it. It's great. I think it's hilarious.
And I think I need to mention what the card actually does, because I guess less than 5% of our listeners would know that. So it's a legendary 1/1 creature for a colorless and a blue. And when Fibblethip the Lost enters the battlefield, draw a card. So it's basically like Elvish Visionary. But if it entered from your library or was cast from your library, draw 2 cards instead. Spoiler, that never comes up in this deck, as far as I'm aware. So it's literally...
I had never realized that line was there.
Yeah. And when it becomes the target of a spell, it's shuffled back into its owner's library. So it literally is a legendary Elvish Visionary. And when I first saw that, and I saw they are playing 2, I was like, why? Why? What's the point? And apparently... and that's the only thing I can make out from the list, it's a draw engine with Caracas. I mean, we're laughing about that thing now, but they finished 12th in the Giant Legacy MCQ. So, to me, that's kind of crazy.
I mean, this is like one of my frustrations with leagues, is like I was saying earlier, like 20 to 25% of my matches don't matter because I will never play against this deck in a real tournament, and I'm just kind of wasting my time. I mean, yeah, I'm saying that now, and then I'm going to face Pirate Stompy in Atlanta, so bring it on.
I mean, this deck wins because it has 4 True Name Nemesis and 3 equipments. So that's probably... the other stuff is, I mean, it's funny, it's great, but I don't think it's like the best way you could build a Daze True Name deck.
Yeah, it plays 1 Knight of the White Orchid, which is white-white, and when it comes into play and you have fewer lands than your opponent, then I think you get to put Plains from your deck into play or something.
Ooh, Plains. So powerful.
I guess it can also fetch Tundra, I'm pretty sure it can, because there's only 1 Plains in the deck. That would be like weird.
Yeah, it can.
And then there's Weathered Wayfarer, which is kind of like the reason you want to play the deck, even though it's secretly True Name Nemesis plus equipment, I guess. But yeah, Weathered Wayfarer, a blue of white for I think a 1/1 creature, and you can activate it for a white mana and tap it and search your deck for any land and put that, I think, into your hand if you have fewer lands than your opponent.
I think the Elvish I think they should just...
I mean...
this reminds me a lot of Bant, but with like Aether Vial, and then Weathered Wayfarer. I actually tried a long time ago putting Aether Vials in a Bant. This idea makes a lot of sense to me. It's just the numbers are really funny.
Yeah, what if I told you that the original deck actually played 2 Aether Vials?
That kind of makes sense to me too, because when I tested the Aether Vials, it wasn't a good Aether Vial deck because you're playing Brainstorm and stuff like that instead of just a bunch of creatures.
It's funny, you sound just like Forbidian and P4 Meter for the one when they talked about that deck like over 10 years ago.
That's funny. I know. I tried building something similar. I'd never seen this thread, but I tried building something similar to this because Noble Hierarch and Deathrite Shaman were so good in Bant. I was like, why don't we just try Aether Vial? And it just wasn't good.
So if you're looking for inspiration, like cards they played back in the deck were Jotungrand and Apocryphite, which is like isn't even like good anymore, and also Vexing Sphinx. And Vexing Sphinx is like super interesting actually if you think of if you don't have to think about it, but it's a 4/4 flyer for a colorless, a blue and a blue, and it has cumulative upkeep, discard a card. So you first like discard 1 card, then you discard 2 cards, so you end up discarding a lot of cards, and once it dies you draw a card for each, I think it's called age or time counter on it. And so basically you get all those cards back that you initially discarded. And that's interesting. And like the reason they initially put that into the deck was that you can recycle bad cards later on, something like Etherwile, and eventually they ended up going down to 2 anyway, or like, I don't know, stuff that you don't need. But what's interesting about the card, and I'm not sure if this is still the case, but it definitely was like 1.5 years ago on Magic Online. The card was insanely bugged. So it added those time counters, but it didn't make you discard. So eventually, like it was a 4/4 flyer for 3 mana on Magic Online, and when it died, you drew a card for every turn you kept it alive. So it was like absolutely overpowered, and yeah, if I guess that would be a good way to get yourself banned from Magic Online. Even though it would be like kind of weird, I guess, if you just feel like, hey, this card is good enough, let's play it. And I guess you wouldn't be banned right away, but if you kept grinding out leaks using their cards, eventually somebody would catch on to it. So yeah, lots of things going on in Legacy. The last deck I want to talk about right now is the deck that I guess Rodrigo Togores popularized, and that's the Maverick Dark Depth deck. And this deck is interesting because I don't even know how to describe it. I first wanted to call it like a 4-color loam deck without loam and 2 of its colors. But that didn't really seem right because it doesn't really have like all those grindy cards or planeswalkers. But I also don't really want to call it like a Maverick deck. Don't really want to call it a depth deck. So
it's just green-white depths or Maverick depth.
Yeah, it's Maverick depth, and it's also really good against Plague Engineer, unlike Maverick, because it plays 4 Giver of Runes over Mother of Runes, and also Elfish Reclaimer. So I think the main
thing it looks
about
great.
Yeah, it looks great, right? The main thing about the deck is that it plays 4 Knight of the Reliquary, which is like another engine that you can utilize in a deck that can also sometimes close out the games on its own. Yeah.
That's why I think it looks great, because it basically looks like a Dark Depths deck. Like, it has most of what you need to be a Dark Depths deck because of the printing of Elvish Reclaimer. You're not losing much by cutting any of the things that they've cut for this. And you get to be a Maverick deck with the Giver of Runes and Knight of the Reliquary. I mean, that's the core of the Maverick part of it, at least. And that can still just win the game, and it's fine with the Dark Depths combo because you can actually use it to do that. But that's, like, probably secondary.
Yeah, I actually have opposite feelings about the deck. I feel like I would not play this deck. I guess I need to give it a shot before I really shut it down. But I did try a similar Matzelay deck. It didn't have as much of the white focus, but it did have, a bunch of Knight of the Reliquaries. And what I found was the black cards were just so important and just much more powerful. Like Vampire Hexmage, it kills Planeswalkers, it resets Chalice, and it lets you combo on turn 2. Whereas you just lack a lot of that power. Also, you don't play the discard spells, which give you a lot of game against combo. So I think game 1, this deck is pretty horrible against combo. And post board, you can win with Dahlias and Gaddock Teagues perhaps. I see Rodrigo's not really playing those cards. He's playing Veil of Summer instead, which I guess is good against Ants. I mean, I think there is potential in this kind of shell, but I think it's significantly weaker than the Urborg shells, which are just much more streamlined towards just discard, do the combo. Whereas these decks are a little bit more I saw people play it at the Classic, and some of them were hovering near the top tables. I mean, I'm skeptical that this will be the next evolution of depths. I think it is a little bit ahead in the mirror because of Knight of the Reliquary, but I think it's significantly weaker against.
Oh, I think it's
just the whole field because you don't have the Thoughtseize into Hexmage I win.
I think it's got a massive advantage in the mirror, but I could be wrong. But yeah, I do see that it seems to have a pretty big hole for combo. But I mean, that Maverick and Depths I think have fairly big holes for combo. Maybe not as big as this one, but because this one doesn't have Thalia, so.
Yeah, it definitely felt like the mirror or on a grander scheme that the depth mirror is why this deck would be something you want to play. It also makes really good use of Elfish Reclaimer together with Knight of Reliquary. So I can see this deck actually winning many games on a regular beatdown path and always threatening the combo.
And you're just going to win in the combo because you have Giver of Runes and you have Tomic. You're going to be able to do the combo a lot safer than the other depth decks in a mirror.
Yeah, it also has a lot of magnets for your opponent's spot removal. They definitely want to. They kind of have to take out Giver of Runes. They also want to take out Knight. I guess depending on how the match goes, you also want to take out Reclaimer with your spot remover spells, and then deck depth just gets there. I guess I kind of like the deck. I'm not sure whether I love for crop rotation. I can't really put a name on it. It just doesn't feel like a crop rotation deck to me. I just want to add more mid-range stuff and maybe even remove the Dark Depth combo and play straight up Green-White Maverick. No, but yeah, I would also love to play and try the deck out. I think Jarvis is streaming it tonight. Maybe I can catch it.
I haven't actually played it. I'm just looking at it here on paper, and I wrote a little bit about it for my article this week too. But
yeah, where does that come out? Where can people see that?
Tonight on MTG Goldfish on Tuesday nights.
So you're writing. Is it actually weekly or is it bi-weekly?
It's weekly. I took 1 week off so far because I didn't have anything to write about.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
It's almost every week.
Guys, I think we're gonna close it out here. We have one more listener question from tonight from Pair of Slacks. And Pair of Slacks was wondering, they're like kind of new to Legacy, and they're struggling with when to move on from an archetype. Like if you're playing a deck, and I think that's something that actually recently happened to me with Elves, when do you know that maybe you should try something new? And like to answer that from my end, I think you can go about it like analytically, strategically, and like track your win rate and see it's going down and figure out, okay, at this point I maybe want to do something about that. But I don't really do that. Like I used to track my win rate and stuff, but it's getting hard, like time-wise. So to me, it was just like a feeling of when I decided not to play Elves in M Camp Frankfurt. I played it in the trials, and I think I won a buy in one of the trials, but the next trial was just like so horrible when I played against 5-color Snow, and it felt so bad because I couldn't punish that. It's a feeling, to me at least. And if that feeling comes up like at a tournament or two, like I've certainly had like spells with Elves where I felt like, oh my god, I played it almost through the entire Top Miracles era, so that says something. But if you constantly find yourself thinking or sighing and going like, oh shit, not this again, I think that's a point where you could consider moving on. If moving on is even an option, like not everybody like can pick a deck and just play that. But if moving on is an option, sometimes it's also good to clear your head to play something else. Like I don't consider, like people talked about that on Reddit and I was quite surprised, but I'm very far from considering myself retired from Elves, for example. But right now I feel like I want to see other people. No, I just want to try something else.
This is the saddest breakup of all time.
No, we are on a break. Not on a breakup. You see what I mean?
That's how the breakup begins, though. Is you take a break.
I actually wonder how many like breaks actually lead into breakups. Must be like 80-90%. I don't know.
Well, we'll find out in a year if this break.
But you're still having like fun every now and then. And then I go back to Maverick, and I feel like Maverick, you understand me much better right now.
Wow,
that is too deep. Back to the listener question though, because I think it is a very good question. So to me, what I think you need to ask yourself is, why am I playing Legacy? Because I think ultimately Legacy, I guess I'll call it a casual competitive format. It can be casual, it can be competitive. I think it's a little bit more casual than it is competitive, but it can be both things. And if you are in it for the more casual reason, then I think you need to figure out what you enjoy the most and just, make all your decisions to maximize that. Whereas if you are on the competitive side, then you want to figure out, hey, if this archetype is not good, I mean, then there's more factors that come into play, like Julian said, like budget and what you can afford and learn to play. Like a lot of times people, they have families, they don't have that much time to play, so oftentimes that's why you'll see a lot of Legacy players are older and they stick to one or two decks. And it's kind of tough for them because Legacy's just gone through so many changes in the past year that like I could see a lot of people in most years, like you come back to Legacy and you probably spend $50 or $100 and then you have like an up-to-date deck again. And this time around it's just so completely different, and the rules of engagement are different too. So I think it's definitely tougher for the casual player to keep up now. But I think if you're just trying to be the spikiest as possible and you can play every deck, then I think it might make some sense to keep track of all your stats and records, and then think about how as the meta evolves, like why your deck might be good or bad. But again, I think I'm in the minority because I do that, but I think not everybody does that.
I agree with both of you for the most part, but mostly Julian about. I mean, personally, I don't think I need to track my win rate to have a feeling about how well my deck is performing. I have tracked in the past, and I never see anything surprising. It's always almost exactly what I think it will be. So I don't track ever anymore. And but there have been times where I feel like my deck is not performing how it should or how it had. And then I just try and identify the reason for that, and I will try to tune out that problem and tune in a new answer to the thing that is making my deck perform more weak than it had. And if that doesn't work, then it's time to hang up the deck and go find something else.
Have you done that before? Have you actually completely retired a deck that you had been having success with? Banned Stoneblade?
Banned Stoneblade, yeah. I had success with that I played that. Now Reanimator is about as long, but I played that deck almost exclusively for like 2 years with quite a lot of success, both on Magic Online and the few paper events that I played. For example, the first MKM I went to, you top aided and I did not, but I didn't have a bye and you did, and we had the same record. So anyway,
was it Frankfurt 2017?
Yeah.
I had 2 buys, I think.
This is not fair.
That was crazy. I went X and 2 and I still top aided. But
yeah, and I went X and 2 with no buys. It's not fair.
I wrote an entire article about how it didn't make sense that I top aided that event. Like, I was about to leave for dinner when they called my name for 8th place. So I was like, what?
But yeah, Bant Stoneblade treated me really well. And then basically what happened was the Delver players figured out how to play against it and realized that I was not on Infect. And so one of the biggest benefits of that deck was people thought you were on Infect, so they played against you wrong. Once they figured out how to approach the deck, I found I could barely beat Delver ever. So that was the number 1 deck in the format, so I had to stop playing Bant.
Did you, like you mentioned, try to fix that issue? And did you even like try more radical stuff before you hung up the deck?
Yeah, no, I tried all kinds of crazy stuff with that deck. I mean, I got to the point where it was like playable. I was playing 4 Leovolds. That was pretty good. But the problem with the deck couldn't really be fixed, other than like putting in a Tarmogoyf or 2. But they didn't really fix the problem. The problem was they attack your mana and you lose because you have so many 3-drops in your deck.
Yeah. I guess the time where you actually like would fix stuff by adding Tarmogoyf, that was like over a decade ago. Where like literally every deck, including the tribal decks, even like there was times when Merfolk splashed green to play Tarmogoyf, just to give you an idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're kind of agreeing. Like you should try, you should definitely try. But once you figured out that you don't enjoy playing the deck anymore, and that of course depends on whether you're in for like the gameplay or like winning, and usually it's a combination of both. Like almost nobody is playing Legacy just to win, or I guess a lot of people are still playing it just for like because they enjoy a different kind of style. So people would play a deck like Goblins, for example, that's coming up. I see a lot of Goblins, and I just like have such a hard time seeing why you would play that. And I hope, Pair of Slacks, you didn't ask your question with regards to specifically Goblins. But yeah.
Hey, Bob said if you enjoy it, play it. And he's got a very good point there. And a lot of the Goblins players, despite having polarizing matchups, like to play Goblins.
You know what? Next time we come together in 2 weeks, Goblins will have won a Legacy Challenge or something. I'm calling it. I mean, we didn't get to talk about that, but also Merfolk finished 2nd in the last Legacy Challenge, and that's a deck we haven't seen in a long while. And I've always been of the opinion that Merfolk is actually much better than people think it is. But yeah, that's a topic for a future podcast, I would say. If you guys want to support this podcast, you can check it out on itsjulian.com. We are also on Twitter @EternalMTG. Took only like a couple years, I almost want to say, until we were able to reclaim that Twitter account. Or if you want to support us monetarily and allow us to run this show and eventually also like get better mics for our co-hosts, because they have such lovely voices and you should get even more access to their amazing voices, you can head to patreon.com/everydayjournal, where you can subscribe on different tiers. Like, for example, our new Patreon, Jeremy, who subscribed on our Grizzlebrand tier, but also our other Patreons like Matt and James on the Eternal Witness tier, as well as Bachu, Scott, and Korosh, who have been supporting us for a long time by now. So that's something that you can do. It also helps us if you leave a review, for example, on iTunes, and apparently you can't review on Spotify. I remember, like, for many episodes, I was like asking people to leave a review on Spotify until several people approached me and told me, "Hey, Julian, you can't leave a review on Spotify." So I'm sorry if you tried to find that. Apparently, it's not a thing. But yeah, on iTunes, it very much is. It helps us to show up better in search results, so more people get access to this, so more people listen to this. So Legacy as a whole like gets more reach. So if that's something that you can do to help us out. And guys, if people want to find you, where can people find you? On Twitch, on Twitter, on LinkedIn? I don't know.
So I'm on Twitter @GrizzlePuff, and I might start streaming more soon. I actually just bought a nice new gaming laptop, so I'm still, settling in and figuring that part out. But hopefully, in the next month or so.
Awesome. And Eric, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at EWLandon1, the number 1. And you can find me on Twitch at EWLandon.
Awesome. So that's going to be it for us. If you want to find me on Twitter, I'm at itsjulian23. And on Twitch, I'm twitch.tv/itsjulian. Thanks so much for coming on, guys. And I'm going to head straight to bed. You're going to be probably like, Eric, what are you going to do? Are you going to stream again? No, you just finished your stream, right?
I have to finish that League of Oops All... No, it's getting to be evening time, but eventually I got to finish it because I borrowed the cards.
Isn't that gonna be depressing if you like finish Oops All Spells all on your own?
I'm not looking forward to it. Yeah, I know.
I mean, it takes you like 5 minutes to play a match, so it can't be
so
that
depressing
bad.
losing to one spell over and over and over again.
Isn't it one of those things that are like more fun when people are watching you doing it?
I don't know.
I would be like upset watching you, and I was upset watching you. I was like, why do people watch this? And you made the point that like 50 people turned out as soon as you started playing.
To me, it was actually
I lost like at least 50 viewers when I started playing it.
To me, it was entertaining on a meta level. Like, it was entertaining to me to listen to Bob being upset about you playing the deck. Or actually, Bob was like upset about that there's people watching you play the deck, and I was being entertained by Bob being upset about those people watching. So it's like, whoa, it's going pretty deep.
I mean, it's kind of like Twitch plays Pokemon, but like way less interesting because it's just you playing this simulation.
I did it for you guys because I thought I only had like a half an hour left, but I had the time wrong. Anyway.
Yeah, time zones are weird, but we managed to figure it out. So, with this, we're going to call it a show, and we see all of you again next time in 2 weeks. Until then, bye-bye. Thank you so much.